Okay. Good morning. Good Erev Shabbos, everybody. The topic of civil marriage is not just relevant to what's going on in Israel, but it's a generic issue affecting most places where Jews live. There's been a debate in Israel for a long time as to whether or not civil marriages ought to be legal in Israel. Right now, the only way to get married in Israel is through the Orthodox rabbinate. Those who do not want to get married in a religious ceremony in Israel usually travel to Cyprus, where they get a civil marriage and they come back. Israel does recognize marriages conducted outside the country, but in Israel, you can only get married through a religious ceremony. The problems with civil marriage are many, many different types of issues. Number one, does the halacha recognize a civil relationship or not just civil, but a non-religious wedding ceremony? Does it have any status in halacha? The short answer is, generally speaking, no, but there are certain aspects of a civil marriage that are recognized, so we'll talk about it. The secular population in Israel has been lobbying for a civil marriage option for a very, very long time. And every so often you'll find a rabbi here or there, like the former Sephardic chief rabbi, Eliyahu Bakshi Daron, who actually indicated he might be open to that possibility. But generically speaking, it doesn't happen and hasn't happened yet. The problems in America, for example, with civil marriage are multiple issues. For example, if a couple got married at City Hall and then got divorced, and then the woman wants to remarry, and she goes to a rabbi for a religious ceremony, can he marry her without having a get? What is the status of that first marriage? What is the status of those children? Are those children in a non-halachic marriage considered mamzerim or not, or illegitimate if it's a second marriage? These are all serious issues that the poskim have been dealing with. Throughout most of civilized history, there have been either religious marriages through the church or through the synagogue. In prehistoric times, obviously, they didn't have marriage ceremonies. A man and a woman lived together. That was it. The Gemara recognizes that this type of relationship can exist, and under certain circumstances, it can be legitimate. That's what I want to explore, some of the ramifications of that today. The first Mishnah in Kedushin teaches us that Isha Niknis, a marriage is affected in three ways: Kesef, Shtar, and Bia. Kesef means an exchange of something of monetary value. Today, it's usually a ring. In previous generations, it could have been a couple of cows or sheep or something else of value. And when you attend a Jewish wedding, an Orthodox wedding at least, when the Masada Kedushin calls up the witnesses and they have this huddle and they examine the ring as if all of a sudden rabbis are jewelers and they understand the value of the difference between a 14-karat gold and 24-karat gold. They're going through a ritual, which unfortunately is not mic'd in the most circumstances. It should be, to determine, is it worth a Sheva Pruta? Absolutely. Then they ask the chassan, is this your ring? Yes. Did you buy it with cash or a credit card? If you bought it with cash or a check and the check cleared, fine, it's yours. If it was bought with a credit card, did you pay the credit card bill? Otherwise, it isn't yours totally halachically. Anyway, that's the huddle when they give the rings. That's the kesef aspect. Shtar, a legal document in halakhic terms, is the ksuba. The ksuba lays out the responsibilities of the husband to the wife. And a marriage certificate in a secular wedding is not halakhically considered a document for halachic purposes. So you have kesef, you have shtar, then you have bia. Bia is the consummation of the marriage. So any one of these three things could affect a marriage. If you live together with a woman and you have relationships and you remain connected with that woman, the halacha recognizes this under many circumstances. This is a rule called Ein Adam Osa Bilosa Bi'ilas Nus. The Gemara assumes that if a person lives with a woman for a period of time and has an intimate relation with a woman over a period of time, then that's considered a relationship. It's a marriage under certain circumstances. It's interesting, the whole concept of Ein Adam Osa Bilosa Bi'ilas Nus takes out of the equation the whole notion of rape or one-night stands. The Gemara apparently assumes that most men have good intentions. You can fall in love with a woman, you can go to bed with her, but the Gemara assumes that if you do that, it's because you have some type of relationship with that individual, and it's not a one-night stand type of thing. The Gemara seems to ignore that possibility in the nature of man. So if a person lives with a woman, even though there's no legal documentation, even though there was no ritual ceremony, under many circumstances, that can be considered a marriage relationship because of the rule of Ein Adam Osa Bilosa Bi'ilas Nus. We assume that if you have this relationship and you're living together over a period of time, that it is a relationship that is recognized by the halacha under certain circumstances. For example, the case that I brought before, if a woman gets divorced from a relationship that was not a religious wedding, does she require a get and the status of the children? Now, we try to get a woman to get a get under all circumstances before she gets remarried. We try, but under many circumstances, this is why I need a posek to make that determination. Under many circumstances, the rabbis will perform the wedding anyway because it wasn't a legal marriage and the children would not be considered illegitimate. And the mamzerim status is very, very important in terms of second or third weddings. Having a relationship with somebody when you already have children from a first husband, what's the status of those second set of children? Could it be illegitimate or not? So the rabbis tend to be lenient in this situation. The public policy issues and the halakhic issues very often clash. Many batei din do require a woman to get a get, even if she was married civilly. The man, on the other hand, which seems to somewhat unfair, can get married without giving a get to his first wife. But then again, a man can have more than one wife, technically speaking, until Rabbi Gershon came along. This question did not really engage poskim until the 19th century, because you didn't have civil marriages per se. Either the church married you or a rabbi married you, and you didn't have common law marriages in most of the civilized world until the modern period. Interesting question comes up. Let's say you had a couple that were married in the church. A Jewish woman marries a Catholic man, and he insists on having a Catholic wedding, and they get married in the church. Is the fact that it was in a church, does that change anything halakhically? And again, as far as the halakha is concerned, that wedding is no different than a wedding in City Hall. So if a woman becomes or a man for that matter, they become balei tshuva if they were married in a civil wedding. They can get married again with a rabbi. If they get divorced, then the rabbis would ask for a get if both of them became balei tshuva afterwards. Again, there are some poskim who are on both sides of this issue. You have some that require the get, some that don't. The majority of poskim would at least seek a get. May not always get it, and at the end they would allow it without the get, but they would try to seek the get. Yes, question.
Going back to something you said, I don't know if I missed it or didn't hear it correctly. Did you say a man can get remarried without a get?
If a man was married in a civil ceremony.
Oh, in a civil ceremony.
In a civil ceremony, correct. Okay. Then he wouldn't. Again, Rabbi, in all situations where there was a civil marriage, and then they go to a rabbi, rabbis would try to get a get whenever possible, even if it was a civil marriage. Because as I said, because of the rule that the halacha considers any long-time relationship as a valid form of a marriage, they would try to get a get. Even though technically it isn't a halachic marriage, they would try to obtain a get. But in the end, if they don't get it, they would still allow the wedding to take place because it doesn't have a halachic status.
So it's as you had said earlier, anyone married in a civil marriage and does not get a get can be married Jewishly after.
Correct. But most rabbis would attempt to get a get first, even though it may have been a civil marriage. They would try to do that. But in the end, if they can't, for whatever reason, they would perform again. It's very bizarre that the civil marriage under certain circumstances is not considered to have any status at all halachically. On the other hand, it does have status halach. So it's a double-edged sword, so to speak, in terms of what constitutes kedushin from a halachic perspective. Any long-term monogamous relationship could be considered halachically a form of kedushin. Put it that way. And it's a vague definition, but those are the conditions that rabbis are working with today.
Wally?
Yes.
What about rape if there's two Jewish witnesses?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that before. Today, that would not be considered anything resembling kedushin. However, in the Chumash, you're required to pay the girl's father 50 slime, and whenever possible to marry her, which is kind of bizarre. But rape is not considered a form of kedushin. Definitely not.
Because there was a period of time when, like the general would have relations with the bride on the wedding night.
Yes. That was usually the non-Jewish, the Roman general, the others. Yeah, that happened, and the only thing that the result was that the bride is not a virgin anymore. It doesn't change the nature of her subsequent marriage. She was raped by a non-Jew. It happens. It doesn't change anything, and unfortunately, there were periods of history where this was quite common, and there was nothing you can really do about it. The only interesting question is, what do you put in the ksuba? You can't really call her a basula anymore.
Right.
That would be the only thing.
And what happens if there's a child from that relationship, that brief fortnight relationship? No change, no difference?
Say that again, Sam. I didn't hear the first part of your question.
If there's a child, she gets pregnant.
If she gets pregnant, yeah. It's problematic. It's problematic that the child.
The child is Jewish.
The child is Jewish.
The mother is Jewish.
Now again, it depends how close to the wedding she gets raped. She could always pass it off as her child. Right. And in the pre-modern period, before you had genetic testing and DNA, there's no way you could tell whose child it was.
Well,
Again,
you can tell by the looks
well, not
sometimes.
always. You could tell by the skin color sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
But not always by the look. Not every child looks like one of his parents. But in the pre-modern age, it was a little bit different than it is today. Today, you could do DNA testing to determine whose child it is. I would imagine, however, if you had a scenario today of an engaged girl who gets raped shortly before the wedding, they would probably push up the wedding date and keep it quiet because nobody has to know, and pass off the child again. If there's an abortion, it's a different story. That's a different shiur. But if she has a child, then she can raise a child as her own, or give it up for adoption. Again, there are a lot of different possibilities, a lot of different scenarios.
When she remarries to a Yehudi, is the baby is that a bechor? From his standpoint, it's a bechor.
Yeah. I mean, it's Petarek. It's the child that was born from her womb. So that child is a bechor, and that child is Jewish.
No, I'm saying when she remarries a Jew.
If you, not
That's
remarries or marries. If she was a victim of rape, and then she gets married to a Jewish guy, right? Then the Jewish guy becomes the father of that child.
Okay, but when they have a son of their own, that's no longer considered a bechor.
That's correct.
It's the father's bechor, but it's not a bechor as far as.
Correct. It's bechor min. It's bechor min. It would be bechor min ha'av, but that has no status really. That would have no. It's a bechor is a bechor. The child has no idea who its father is, so the child being brought up as a Jew, and the child has to, is a member of the family. These are very unfortunate scenarios that occur.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Going back to the topic of the civil marriages in Israel, if two Israelis get civilly married and they have kids, is there any issue with their children marrying children who were married, under a chuppah?
Yeah. So these are the questions that the rabbis wrestle with. Again, going back to the rule that I stated in the beginning, if we assume that ein adam osa be'ilaso be'ilas nus, and that a long-term monogamous relationship that may not have taken place under a chuppah might be considered a legitimate marriage for purposes of not making those children illegitimate. So if children from a civil marriage marry from people, it's a legitimate marriage. Whether the children decide on their own to go through some type of a quasi-gerus, that's up to them. I mean, I can see a situation where children of a non-religious couple who did not have chuppah kedushin become balei tshuva, so they may go to mikveh and go through some type of they don't need gerus if the mother was Jewish, but they may just to make themselves feel better. They may go to a mikveh, which is a common practice, but they can certainly marry into it. I mean, again, because it cuts both ways. If a couple that was married civilly gets divorced, okay, and they didn't get a get, they can get remarried by a rabbi. They would prefer that they get a get in order to do that, but if worst comes to worst, it's considered a legitimate marriage for that purpose. So a civil marriage has a duality. On the one hand, it's not recognized by halacha. On the other hand, under certain circumstances, it might be simply to make life function. And this is a big problem in Israel today. You have a very large and very vocal secular population that wants nothing to do with the rabbinate, and they don't want to have religious marriages. But right now in Israel, the only way to get married is with a rabbi, or go to out of the country to get married in Cyprus, which is what most of them do. In America, it's the same problem. You have many people who don't get married, many Jewish families who get married civilly, and later on in life they decide to get religion, or their children decide to get religion, and the rabbis have to deal with it as creatively as they possibly can. But I just want to point out that a civil marriage, although not preferred, under certain circumstances, in order to prevent mamzerus, in order to prevent other types of illegitimacy in terms of Kohen and Levi Yisrael, a lot of difficult questions come up that the rabbis try to be as lenient as possible. There are some who are very machmir. There are some, there are some rabbanim who would reject a couple like this. There are some rabbanim who don't perform conversions. They're panim lakan. But civil marriage in Israel is a big issue. It is constantly been coming up since the state was founded, and it's a bigger problem there than it is in America. In America, you don't have those kind of requirements for a religious marriage. In Israel, at this point, you do. So
I would imagine that someone in Israel who gets married with a reform rabbi or a conservative rabbi, both of which exist in Israel, falls under the same category as a civil marriage in terms of, maybe not requiring a get, but
yeah,
I don't.
Reform and conservative marriages, although not officially recognized by the state, would be considered like a common law marriage in the same type of a status, which, as I said, cuts both ways. So depending on the circumstances, and then there are those who are more lenient, and there are those who are more restrictive. It depends on the circumstances, but one of the most difficult, Gittin and Kedushin are two of the most difficult areas in modern Psak Halacha. When Rabbi Goren was the chief rabbi of Israel, there was a big case about mamzerus that almost ripped the country apart, because he was very lenient and all the other rabbis were much more strict. And there was a case, I don't know all the details about it, but a very big issue in terms of a certain family that he allowed to get married, and all of the rabbis said they shouldn't be allowed to get married, whatever. But you have two different points of view, and these are very sensitive issues. You're dealing with families, dealing with lives. And, it's one thing to talk about halacha in a theoretical sense, but when you come down to practical issues, it's very nice when you're sitting in a beis medrash and you're having this discussion, but when you get out in the field and you are the rabbi in the community and you have to deal with these issues, so you can call your teacher, you can call a bigger rabbi, but bottom line is, when you're in the field, it's on your shoulders, and you have to make decisions that are sometimes very hard to make, and you need to have the halachic wherewithal upon which to base those decisions, and if you don't, you have to know who to call.
Well, it wasn't there. Weren't there cases? I don't know, maybe 5, 10. I forget how many years ago, where rabbis, what they do, they decided that retroactively that there were marriages that people shouldn't, retroactively, that conversions that shouldn't have been done.
Yes.
What was the status? What happened to the status of age in the marriages? What happened to the children? Because I understand there were almost by that time there were grandchildren. Right.
Oh, so you had a certain group within in Israel. You have a number of rabbinic groups. You have the chief rabbinate of Israel. Then you have the more right-wing rabbinic groups, and the right-wing rabbinic groups tried to push through certain conversion procedures that were very strict. In other words, and as a result, they invalidated hundreds, if not thousands, of previous conversions that were done by the chief rabbin. For example, if you wanted to, according to this group, if you wanted to convert, not only did you have to commit to a life of Torah mitzvos, but you had to live in a frum community, and you had to go to a certain school, and you had to go to a certain shul, and the woman had to cover her hair in a certain way. Otherwise, the conversion was not valid. And as a result, they retroactively invalidated, hundreds, if not thousands, of conversions, which the general community did not accept. They also put forth a list of accepted rabbis whose conversions they would accept. There's a list of, if a rabbi in America performs a conversion, is it accepted in Israel? And if you look at that list, for example, Rabbi Rothwachs is listed as a rabbi whose conversion is accepted. Rabbi Yuden's name does not appear on that list. Go figure. I mean, it was a very bizarre turn. That list is still out there. And I say, it has not been accepted. But there are many rabbis who won't. The Lubavitcher Rebbe did not believe in conversions, period. He didn't. The Lubavitch does not do conversions. That's it. End of story. Because the standards are so high and very few people can meet those high standards, they just don't do it. Today, rabbis, if a person is sincere and a person makes certain basic commitments, most conversions, go through. But you can go very, very far to the right, which this group did. And in general, you can't invalidate so many conversions because you're down to second, third generation already, your children and grandchildren. You can't say that they're all mamzer. I mean, it was more political than religious, I think. But there was a group, Sam, you're correct. But it generally has been quiet. And if people want to go to them for their conversions, they can do that. But there is, I will say, there are many rabbinical groups. That's part of the politicization of the rabbinate in Israel. You have a modern Orthodox group of rabbis who has different standards for conversion than the chief rabbinate. And that's getting more and more adherents to join their particular group.
Didn't as a result of this, I think it was Rabbi Riskin, sort of tried to make his own rabbinical vad or something like that.
Well,
his own group of rabbis.
There are several different groups of Orthodox rabbis, each with its own group. And I say that there's the chief rabbinate, then you have the Haredi rabbinate, and then you have a more modern Orthodox rabbinate. So there are three. I mean, there are many subgroups, but there are Hasidic and so forth. But there are three major rabbinic groups, each with their own standard and each one vying for legitimacy. And each one perhaps might not accept the other's conversion, but they are taking place.
So doesn't that, so if you get, I know somebody here who had, now she was, I think she did some kind of IVF kind of thing, and it was her baby. Somebody else carried it. I forget what the details were. But anyway, she had the baby do an Orthodox conversion. This little baby, I think it's a girl, grows up. She wants to get married or she wants to go to Israel. I mean, I can't imagine what the prospects might be for something like that.
Again,
in the future.
If you're coming to Israel and you have a conversion certificate, or you have some type of documentation, I remember must have been about 10 years ago, I get a call from a rabbi in some place in Canada who asked me about a conversion that I participated in 1971. And I remember the conversion. And the other two rabbis are already dead. So he found my name somehow and he got a hold of me because this woman's child is going to be married by the rabbi, and he wanted to know if the child was legitimately Jewish. So he was doing his due diligence. So they do check. If they're doing things properly, rabbis do follow up. I had a grand niece of mine made Aliyah, and she had to have a letter proving that she was Jewish. And I wrote a letter saying that I knew her mother, her grandmother, I knew her great grandmother. They were all Jewish, and she was accepted, and so forth and so on. A friend of hers wanted to make Aliyah too, and she asked me if I'd write a letter for a friend, and I said I can't because I don't know that friend. I couldn't do that. But usually the rabbis do check documentation if they're doing their job properly, whether it's in Israel or it's outside of Israel.
They have to check. They have to check that you were properly Jewish.
Yeah.
I'm joking. I'm saying thanks.
In the first case, my name was on the conversion certificate, not my address, but the guy did his due diligence and he found me, 30, 50 years later, whatever it may have been, 50 years later. But I just wanted to raise the issue of civil marriage because it comes with a whole host of issues and problems that contemporary poskim have to deal with, giving it in a society today where people don't get married by a rabbi, or they're just more and more you see people just living together without even a civil marriage. And just living together also has certain halachic status if you do over a period of time. But I find more fascinating than anything else is that the halacha doesn't consider the notion of in contemporary sexual mores of the one-night stand. That doesn't enter into the halakhic consciousness, which is why they could say if you have a long-term monogamous relationship, that does have halakhic status. It's not preferred, but under certain circumstances, it might be accepted in order to not to consider children illegitimate and not to require a get.
Wally, what happens? Someone basically, whether he had meal or not really meal or whatever they call circumcised, now he becomes frum. He marries someone, and the rabbi doesn't. How does he prove? Does he need a proper meal, or what's the situation?
Well, if the child was not halakhically circumcised in a bris, then what they very often they'll do something called hatafas dam bris. They'll just you can't recircumcise someone who's already been circumcised. So they'll do is they'll get a drop of blood, make a pinprick and l'shem mila, and that will be acceptable. And that's what you do with converts all the time.
So you do the same thing with someone who's halakhically Jewish, but not a proper meal. You do the same procedure. Okay.
Correct. So yeah, it's called hatafas dam bris. So it should be l'shem bris mila. Anything else?
Yeah, Wally, getting back to the race, if the chassan is the Kohen or Levi, that would create a big problem.
Yes. And there have been situations. I remember in Fairlawn, there was a young couple who met through NCSY, and they wanted to get married. And Rabbi Yudin said, "I'm sorry, I can't be Masada Kedushin because he was a Kohen, and her status, her mother had converted, whatever this case may have been. A Kohen would not have been allowed to marry her, and they didn't get married. So there are situations. I had a situation many years ago where a man was a Kohen who wanted to marry a divorcee, and I couldn't do it. I tried to find heterim left and right. I just end with this one little story. I may have told you the story once before. When I lived in Canada, Rav Pinchas Hirschbrum was the chief rabbi of the city. Gadol Batorah. He knew Shas by heart. In Russian and Polish literature. He was a brilliant man. And I never had to pass in a shayla. I always would call him. And this was a difficult case. And I tried to find ways to allow this man to marry a divorcee. And I tried to find heterim. And I quoted poskim. It's a very complicated case. and I called him up and I presented my case to him. And one of the heterim was from the Ma'archei Lev, the Varshavah Rav, under the particular set of circumstances. So all he says to me in Yiddish, give our cook in the Yashmotos. Take a look in the notes in the back of the volume. And very often when they'll publish a sefer and there were extra notes post-publication, they'll stick it in the back in very small letters. So you look in the back of the sefer, and Rav Hirschberg must have been about 17 years old at the time that book was published. But they included his notes where he disagreed with the psak of the Varshavah Rav. So that's why we have Gedolim to ask questions. And sometimes these are very gut-wrenching decisions you have to make when people want to get married, and you say, I'm sorry, we can't do this. Now, whether they went to a conservative rabbi or another rabbi, I don't know. But sometimes the answer is no. And that's a hard answer sometimes. And lives get disrupted and trajectories change because you can't do what you want to do all the time because the halacha doesn't allow it. So different situations, yes.
Getting back to the ownership of the ring, if a man walks into the jeweler and he gives him a check and the jeweler says the ring is yours, the man picks it up. Is that not a kinyan? Has he not acquired the ring?
He acquires the ring, but halakhically, it has to be totally his. And until the check clears, the deal is not consummated. In other words, for all intents and purposes, it's his ring. But halakhically, it has to wait till the check clears. Same thing if you buy it with a credit card.
So any transaction where the check hasn't cleared is not a kinyan.
It has to be paid for. And a credit card and a check by its nature there's a delay until the check clears.
Yeah.
Because what happens if I give you a check and the check bounces? Or the credit card doesn't go through for some reason.
But
if I buy a ring with a credit card,
yeah,
and then the credit card gets stolen and it didn't get processed or whatever it might be, well, the number they cancel it. I mean, I wasn't unaware of it at the time because somebody had fraudulent. You have to. These are questions, and that's why when you go to a wedding and you see the rabbis consulting before the chassan says Harayat Mekudeshes, because they want to make sure that the ring is really his, that he paid for it in cash, or the check cleared, the credit card cleared, or it was his grandmother's ring that was given to him and he owns it, stuff like that. These are the questions that they have to make sure. So halakha kinyanim are different than just signing a credit card or writing a check. You have to wait till the check clears.
Well, it would seem that if the seller agrees to accept the check or the credit card, then he's agreed to transfer the ownership.
He may agree to transfer the ownership from his perspective, but from the halakha's perspective, the ownership is not transferred until the check clears.
Okay.
That would be the halakha.
Well, I'm going to be very careful next time I get married.
Good thing. Anybody else? Have a wonderful Shabbos out there.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great Shabbos. Thank you.
Have a good Shabbos, Wally.
Good Shabbos.
Bye. Shabbos, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Mandy.